My name is Laura Hall, and this is my presentation of the science experiment that I conducted on the 17th of March 2012, entitled Watching Paint Dry. I first thought of this issue when I was painting during an art project. This project was creating a fairy costume for myself. It looked good, by the way. But whilst I was painting, I noticed that some paints were drying faster than others. Why, I thought to myself. Is it the type of paint? Well, no, because all the paints I'm using are acrylics. Is it the colour of paint? Maybe. So I decided to investigate to find out what colour paint dries the fastest, or if it makes any difference at all. My hypothesis for this investigation is, the darker the colour of paint, the faster it will dry. The materials needed for this investigation are 8 different colours of paint of the same kind in order to control the variable. For example, I used acrylic paints. I chose the 8 colours of black, white, olive green, yellow, pink, red, cobalt blue and lavender. This ensures that I had a variety of colours from both the darker and lighter ends of the scale. However, you can use different and any number of colours that you like. You will also need one paintbrush. Use the same brush for each colour and trial to keep this variable controlled. 1 cup of water to wash the brush after each trial. 1 paint palette to store the paint. 1 white A4 piece of paper. By keeping the paper the same for each trial, the variable of the surface painted on is controlled. And finally, 1 stopwatch to measure correctly and accurately the dependent variable of the time taken for the paint to dry. This experiment needs to be completed on the same day, in the same place, to control the temperature, weather conditions, amount of sunlight, and the environment. Step 1. Begin by setting up the workplace. Pour water into the cup and place the paintbrush in the water. Put the first colour of paint on the palette, ready to start. Step 2. Start with your first colour and paint a swatch onto the piece of paper. Control the size of the swatch and the amount of paint used each time to keep the test fair. Step 3. Using the stopwatch to keep track of time, touch test the paint every 5 seconds to see when the paint dries. Step 4. Repeat 5 times to achieve an average for the colour. Step 5. Repeat the process for each colour of paint. Make sure you place the next paint colour on the palette as needed to ensure the paint does not dry out and the test is kept fair. These are the results of my investigation. The table shows the time recorded for each trial and the average time for each colour of paint. The graph shows the average time taken for each colour to dry and highlights which colours dried fastest. The results show that the darker colours dried quickest, with black being the fastest. But why do darker colour paints dry faster? Well, let's start with what makes paint different colours. Ball discusses how in ancient art, paint colours were products of nature. This includes, but is not limited to, plants and dirt, which were grounded to form pigments that paint was then made from. As time went on and arts and science developed, the way in which these pigments were created evolved. Ball explains how synthetic pigments were produced to make different colour paints. So now we know what gives paint different colours. How does it affect the rate at which it dries? The reason objects have different colours is dependent on that object's ability to reflect light. The pigments in paint are made from chemicals that absorb and reflect different wavelengths from the light spectrum. Some wavelengths, as Hecker suggests, that are absorbed by different objects are not necessarily reflected, giving the appearance of different colours. Professor Hoff and Dr. Barons both argue that darker colours are better at absorbing light than lighter colours. Hoff states that light is energy and therefore darker colours are actually better absorbers of energy. When objects absorb energy, they heat up. So the darker the colour of paint, the more energy it absorbs rather than reflects, and the hotter the paint becomes. It is because darker colours absorb more energy and become hotter that darker paints dry fastest. In conclusion, it is the pigments in paint that give them their colour. The darker the colour of paint, the more light, or energy, it absorbs. This absorbed energy heats up the paint. The more energy that is absorbed, the faster the paint will heat up and dry. That is why darker colours of paint dry fastest.